Hi everybody, this is Lowell again with music theory, and we're discussing harmony. And in particular, I wanted to talk about jazz harmony a little bit more, and the discussion of seventh chords, ninth chords, 11, 13, and the way that you write them. Um, there's some of jazz is not quite standardized yet. It's a little bit early in history to say that it's standardized, but these are the notations that I learned, and hopefully it helps you. The first off, I wanted to talk about, and I've already discussed, the stacking of thirds in a previous video, but I wanted to review that for a moment. So this first one, just taking your C major triad, and this obviously can be done on any foundation of any of the 12 notes that we have. And so you have C, E, G, that's a major triad. And then to create your seventh chord, you add one more third stacked up on top of it. And so what that sounds like is, here's the C, E, G, B, and then the next example, and which, let me talk about the stacking. So if we stack another note on top of that, the D, then that becomes a 9 chord, and it's really just an octave above a second. And so sometimes this can be written C added 2, or C with a 2 next to it. And so it depends on the situation, how you want to notate it in terms of the voicing. But you have, C is 1, obviously. So 1, 2, 3, that's the E. 4, 5, that's the G. 6 is the A. B is the 7, and then 8, and then 9. All right, so 9 is the same thing as 1, just an octave higher. So, and then if we add another third, then that's 10, 11, and then we have 13 all the way up here. And so because I have this tiny keyboard, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to span that, but let me see what I can do here. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. It's actually an octave higher written here, so, right? And so what ends up happening whenever you have an 11 chord, you typically leave out the third. So it would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and so we would leave the third out, which is this, and so you end up having this. And so because this is based on a major 7 chord, 1, 3, 5, 7, and this is a B natural, and so that's a major 7 chord, which is this. Then we actually would call everything above that based upon a major, so a major C chord. So it's going to be C major 7, or it's going to be C major 9, or C major 13, or 11, or C major 13. And so the way that you typically write this in jazz is going to be this. And I learned to use a triangle to represent major. Other people just write capital M-A-J. But so if it's a C major 7, then I'm going to write it like that. If it's a C major 9, then I'll turn it into that. On 11, 13. That's the nomenclature that you would use. And so this next chord is a dominant 7 because of this flat on the 7th. So that's, and so if I end up adding that next third, then that's a C. In jazz, you don't have to write dominant. It's just because it's so common. It's just commonly understood that you're going to call this a C7. You don't have to write dominant 7. In classical music, they make a big deal. This is a dominant 7, but it's still written the same way. So you don't even use any kind of nomenclature for that. And so if I added another third, then that's a C9, and on up, okay, 11 and 13. And so that's the nomenclature for that. The next chord is a interesting one, and this is called a C minor major. And so it's built on the minor triad down here, C minor, so C, E flat, G, and then you add the major seventh to the top of that, and so that's literally called a C minor major. This is how I learned to spell it, or the nomenclature for that. Small m being minor, capital M being major. The next one is a C minor 7. By the way, I'm going from the largest intervals to the smallest intervals. So the largest being your major 7, and then we'll end up here with the smallest, which is your diminished 7. But this is your minor 7, and so this is a C small m 7. And again, the same thing applies. You start stacking the thirds, and it's all built on, the nomenclature for jazz is all based upon your core harmony, or your core first few triads right down here, and everything else above that takes on the name of these 4 notes. So that's your C minor 7. If you add the 9 or the 13, I'm sorry, the 11 or the 13, 9, 11, 13. And then here is the C half diminished 7, and so it's built, you have a minor triad, a minor third, and a minor third, and a major third. And so here's your minor, or your diminished foundation for that chord. You have, 2 minor thirds stacked on each other, so minor third, minor third. But then the top third is a major third, and so that's a half diminished 7. And so that would be written this way. The diminished is the circle. It looks like a little, degrees circle. And half diminished is you put your slash through it and write 7, 9, 11, 13. All right, and then here's your fully diminished 7. And so that's going to be just a little circle with no slash. There is another interesting one, which is not really your foundational ones. Everything I just showed you is your foundational jazz chords, but this one is used a lot, and it's just a major. It's up here. It's like it can either be a major or a dominant 7th chord, but you take the 5th scale degree and raise it, and it's called a sharp 5. And so you would have, here's your dominant 7. Let me do the C major 7 first. And so you have your B natural, and then you sharp your 5. So here's the G, but then you turn it into a G sharp. Right? Another version of this would be if you had just your dominant 7, right, like here, but then you sharp the 5 on that. It's a very common jazz chord. And so that's written, I'll just write the dominant 7 version, C7, and then you put in parentheses sharp 5. So, there's all sorts of different ways of spelling jazz, and jazz can be spelled, you can almost pick and choose how you're going to spell it, and everybody's going to kind of know what you're talking about if you spell it in different ways. But for example, what I was talking about here with the 9 could also be the added second. And so, if the player was putting that D here in the chord, then you would actually call it an added second instead of a 9. Although if a player saw a 9, then they could voice it that way. Nevertheless, the point that I'm trying to make here in terms of spelling is that if anything that you add to the chord, you put it in parentheses. For example, you would add, if you had a C7, but then you wanted to add that second, then you would put it in parentheses and sometimes you just go ahead and say add two, um, and it's all based upon it. This is not based. This is different. The way that this is spelled is different than the way classical music thinks. So with classical music, the key signature does make a difference in terms of your harmonic analysis and the numbers that you use. But in jazz, regardless of what key you're in and regardless of the key signature, if it's all based upon whatever that chord is. Like I could be in the key of C and be playing, in jazz you write an A flat. Everything is based upon the root note of that A flat and what an A flat would do. And so in jazz, what you're going to do is you're going to write, if, for example, if I wanted to say add 4, to add the 4th scale degree. So let's say that I'm actually in the key of A flat. I'm playing along in the key of A flat, but then I just decide that I want a C chord in the middle of that A flat key signature, which would be unusual to have a C chord, functioning in A flat major. Then what you would do is you would make it a major scale based upon C major, because that's the chord, that's the place at that moment that the harmony is happening. And so you have a C chord, and then you spell that C chord with that added 4th, right, based upon a major scale built on C. You wouldn't be using an E flat, which is in the key of A flat. You wouldn't be using an A flat or anything else. You would just be using a major scale built on C, right? And so here's a C chord, and then I add that 4th based upon that C major. So if I wanted to have an added 4th, so C major, add 4, sometimes they'll just write a 4 next to it, or sometimes they put it in parentheses. Say another, commonly added chord is a 6, so 1, 3, 5, and then I'm adding that 6th. All right, so that's, great, all well and good. You can add that 6 to it, but, here's what I'm trying to say in terms of spelling it. If you add that 6th, then it literally is an A minor chord. You're spelling this. Those are the same notes that you would use in an A minor 7 chord. It's just that the voicing is different to where you have the C on the bottom. So you could spell it in A minor 7, or you could spell it a C major added 6th. You're using all the same notes. And so that takes me to what I wanted to finish on in terms of jazz, and that is, how do you spell things that are inverted? And I already kind of got into it. But so here you have, I took this first C major 7 chord, and the E is on the bottom, and so the E is not the actual root of the chord. It should be this C, E, G, B, but now I've taken that C and put it up an octave. So now E is on the bottom. So in classical music, you would spell this differently. You would, the nomenclature for this would be different. But in jazz, what you would say is this really is a C major 7 chord. And so I'm going to write C major 7. That's how you spell it. But because the E's on the bottom, I'm going to put a slash and then write E underneath. And that E, whatever the note is on the bottom, that's actually a single note. It's not a chord. And so it's the bass note. And so that bass would be, way down here. You would have the bass. I can't go down because my keyboard's tiny, but the bass note would be down here, and then you would have, right up on the top. And then same thing, like I just took this chord, this C half diminished, and so normally that would be spelled this way or sound this way with the C on the bottom, like I'm playing this. So C, E flat, G flat, B flat, but I'm now the G flat is on the bottom and these other notes are on the top. So it's G flat, B, C. Got my pen in my hand. So now the G flat is on the bottom. So the way that you would write that is C half diminished, 7 with the G flat on the bottom, right? And so jazz thinks differently than classical in terms of harmonic analysis. And so it's really more chord by chord by chord by chord, regardless of what key you're in. And so with jazz, don't think so much about your key signature. Like if you're a classical music, background and you're trying to transition to jazz, then, you got to basically forget what key signature you're in and just think in terms of chord by chord by chord. Now, I will finish this segment by saying, as a composer, what I've really enjoyed, like if you are studying composition from a classical background, then you have what's called species counterpoint. And so counterpoint gives you these rules of voice leading. And it becomes really tricky to voice lead whenever you have a very limited group of notes in a chord. But what I've enjoyed as a composer is actually expanding species counterpoint to include jazz harmony. And so, when you have jazz harmony, then it gives you more choices in your harmonic progressions to choose from, so that you can actually make your lines stronger and more beautiful, because you have more notes that you can weave around to. Instead, for example, in species counterpoint in classical music, you really only have these first 4 notes or 3 notes that you're weaving around in harmonic motion. But with jazz harmony, you can pick from all those notes, and so it makes it easier to avoid your parallel fifths, which this is it opens up. I just got opened up into a whole nother discussion about parallel harmonies and how that can actually be seen as one line. Like when you see a dominant 7 chord moving together structurally, where all the lines are exactly congruent with a dominant 7 chord, then you can actually, as a composer, you can treat that as one line in counterpoint against something else, because you're really dealing with the harmonic series that's moving as one line together. But that's a topic for another discussion. I hope this helps.